Welcome, 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 my friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you as always by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. Well, my friends, it's been another week of very bad news. We learned this week that two members of the Supreme Court were with the Stop the Steal crowd. Justice Thomas's wife, Jeannie, we've known for a long time, was working directly with the conspirators. But last week it was revealed that Justice Alito was also flying a flag upside down, the symbol of the insurrection. This just focused our attention on the reality of the Supreme Court dominated by MAGA Republicans. Over the past few decades, the Republicans have been packing the federal benches with MAGA Republicans, and the result has been to make prosecution of Donald Trump for his federal offenses all but impossible. The Supreme Court is protecting Trump. It's not just Eileen Cannon. But it is worthwhile recalling that in 1873, the Supreme Court in the slaughterhouse cases accepted the argument that the 14th Amendment was written really to protect corporations. And while the court stripped Black people of their rights in 1896 in Plessy v. Ferguson, they recognized corporations as people in 1873 and reaffirmed that decision in 2010 in Citizens United. And we're watching the conclusion of the hush money trial. In 2016, Donald Trump was afraid that Stormy Daniels might undermine his chances for election. In 2024, none of that seems to matter. His supporters now wear diapers to his rallies and release penis balloons. Now, apparently, none of his reprehensible characteristic traits matter. He is our last best hope against Biden and the pedophiles. The left will refuse to vote for Genocidal Joe, and the Orthodox Jews will support Trump as the strong man who will save Israel, or at least allow them to carry on their war against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Jim Hansen came out last week with a study showing that global warming was accelerating. That is, the rate at which the planet is warming is accelerating. We're getting hotter faster. Hansen has a new book, Sophie's Planet, a search for the truth about our remarkable planet and its future, and which is, according to the press release, is a series of letters to his granddaughter, Sophie. The world in this book, the world's leading climatologist shows how it is still possible to ensure that young people inherit a clean world. Look, if Hansen can be an optimist, why can't I? So the difference is that I'm a historian and I'm not looking just at what is technically possible. Kafka said it best. There's plenty of hope, just none for us. And this brings me to the subject of this week's show, another book, brand new book by David Jong, Nazi Billionaires, The Dark History of Germany's Wealthiest Dynasties. It's not a new story. I wrote about it in a lecture, There But for Fortune, that I gave at my brother's synagogue in Clearwater, Florida in 1980. Here's what I had to say. I would like to tell you a story about a headache and its remedy. The story has to do with a company that produced Bayer aspirin, IG Farben. IG Farben was the largest corporation in Germany before World War II and one of the largest corporations in the world. From the onset, the Nazis attacked the corporation as an instrument of international finance dominated by Jews. And in fact, such well-known German Jews as Max Warburg, Arthur von Weinberg, Alfred Merton, Kurt Oppenheimer, owned large amounts of stock in the company, and Fritz Haber, a baptized Jew, was the company's chief executive officer. IG was cartooned by the Nazis as Isidor G. Farber, a grotesque caricature of Shylock, and IG Moloch, with an ugly reference to the Canaanite god that devoured children. The headache I'm referring to began in 1932. IG Farben had invested 300 million marks in the development of synthetic oil and rubber. Unfortunately, with the discovery of oil in Texas, the bottom dropped out of the oil market. Rubber was equally cheap. So the company seemed to have invested an enormous amount of money in a hopeless venture. There was one ray of hope. One of the political candidates running for election in 1932 told IG officials that an economy without oil is inconceivable, that Germany must be able to produce her own motor fuel, even if it entails sacrifice. It is urgently necessary, he told IG officials, that the hydrogenation of coal be continued. After hearing his views, the chairman of IG Farben remarked, "The man is more sensible than I thought." And so it was that IG Farben donated 400,000 marks towards the election of Adolf Hitler in 1933. Now the story has a bizarre and tragic ending. For you see, IG Farben then invested nearly 1 billion marks to build a giant factory complex that would eventually produce 750,000 tons of oil per month. The factory was so large it used as much electricity as the city of Berlin. The name of that factory was Auschwitz. IG Farben could count on an unlimited supply of cheap labor. In fact, it was all very businesslike. IG labor policy was simple. Inmates were treated in such a way as to exploit them to the highest possible extent at the lowest conceivable expenditure. The average IG worker lost about 6 to 9 pounds a week. Inmates rarely lasted more than 3 months, after which they were released to Birkenau, just a few miles away, and at Birkenau they were reduced to soap, fertilizer, and ashes. Each dupe utilized in this fashion earned IG and the SS about $400. Now consider this. In 1944, during the final Saturnalia of destruction, when 15,000 people a day were being gassed at Auschwitz, Jewish groups around the world were clamoring for the destruction of the death camps. In the United States, the World Jewish Congress and Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, led the campaign. Morgenthau, through the War Refugee Board, approached the War Department with the urgent request that Auschwitz death facilities be bombed. After considering the request, John J. McCloy, Assistant Secretary of War, issued the following statement. The War Department has been approached by the War Refugee Board, which has raised the question of the practicability of this suggestion. After study, it became apparent that the operation could be executed only by diversion of considerable air support essential to the success of our forces engaged in decisive operations elsewhere, and would in any case be of such doubtful efficacy that it would not warrant the use of our resources. There has been considerable opinion to the effect that such an operation, even if practicable, might provoke even more vindictive action by the Germans. That statement was issued on August the 14th, 1944. On Sunday, August the 20th, 1944, 127 flying fortresses escorted by 100 Mustang fighters dropped 1,336 500-pound high-explosive bombs on the synthetic oil and rubber factory of Auschwitz. In fact, from early July onwards, the 15th Air Force Division turned its primary attention to destroying Germany's synthetic fuel industry at Auschwitz. The area was a hotbed of bombing. The crematoria could easily be distinguished since they were equipped with smokestacks that rose 175 feet into the air. It's hard to understand how the bombers missed the gas chambers. Of course, it wasn't an accident. Each bombing mission was given a specific set of targets, and the gas chambers were never among them. John J. McCloy went on to serve as president of Chase Manhattan Bank, chairman of the board of the Ford Foundation, and one of the first presidents of the World Bank. He also represented the American oil companies in 1973, and within days of the Yom Kippur War, McCloy was at the White House urging Nixon not to rearm the Israelis. In 1978, I was a graduate student at the University of Washington University when McCloy was a commencement speaker and introduced to us as a model for us all. I should remark that in 1973, when Nixon was making this call to resupply Israel, Israel was clearly in very serious situation. There were 4 Israeli jets that were running round the clock, cruising, their engines were running, so that they could lift off within minutes of giving the order. And they were armed with nuclear weapons. 2 of them were to head to Syria and 2 of them to Egypt. Nixon really never had a choice. And it's worth considering that this situation is probably one of the most serious threats of the possible use of nuclear weapons that we're facing right now. If Israel were to be in a situation where its existence were threatened, it will use its weapons, and it has a formidable nuclear arsenal. So I've said this before, our future is not in our hands. It's already been decided. And but we've got another week. So stay safe, take the Camels Challenge, and hopefully I'll be back next week with more bad news.